In the high desert outside Florence, Colorado, there's a place built to make noise go quiet. No shouting, tears, no clanking chaos, just concrete that swallows sound and routines designed to erase surprises. This is ADX Florence, the federal supermax that turned the idea of a tough prison into a science. It wasn't born from theory. It was born from fear after a pair of back-to-back officer killings in the early 80s forced the Bureau of Prisons to admit something brutal. Some men can turn any normal prison into a battlefield. The answer was a new kind of control, a system where the architecture itself is a guard and the rules are stitched into the walls. From the outside, it looks like a government building with a grim secret. Inside, it's a machine. Doors that don't open unless others are sealed, cameras that never blink, windows that let in the sky but nothing else. Every step is mapped. Every angle is deliberate. The goal isn't just to stop an escape, it's to shut down the possibility of chaos before it starts. You can feel it in the air. The kind of stillness you only get when a place is engineered to remove chance. But the scariest thing about ADX isn't the razor wire or the towers. It's the precision. The schedules that never drift. The distances designed so people never get close enough to improvise, the way sound doesn't travel. For the right inmate, that silence isn't punishment, it's protection for everyone else. For the wrong inmate, it's a pressure cooker that never cools. Here's the part they don't put on brochures. ADX isn't just a cage for the worst of the worst. It's a pressure valve for the whole federal system. When an inmate turns a high-security prison into a constant emergency organizing, threatening, cutting deals through vents, he gets sent to the place where those signals die. If you've ever wondered why you don't hear about riots at ADX, it's because the building itself makes it almost impossible to spark one. That's the point. And that's why the name Supermax still makes even hardened inmates go quiet. But that wasn't the whole story. Because for ADX to work, the control can't just be physical. It has to climb inside your habits, your senses, your expectations, until the building isn't just around you, it's in you. Picture a box inside a box, inside a box. That's the ADX blueprint. Double doors that don't open together. Sluice systems that stage you between worlds. Sensors that map a person's presence to the inch. Ranges laid out so one person can pass and another can't. Even the windows are a lesson. A narrow slit, angled to show sky and roofline, enough to remind you there's an outside, not enough to let you triangulate where you are. It's controlled by geometry. The rooms are intentionally plain. A poured concrete bed platform, a built-in desk, a stool that won't break into parts, fixtures that shut off if they're misused. Mirrors that can't become blades, lights you can switch but can't weaponize. Entertainment exists, but on the prison's terms, TV and radio routed through a filter that gives you something to look at without giving you a way to coordinate with the world. In a place where a letter can carry coded orders, even a channel list is a security decision. Movement is the currency. Most days, it doesn't circulate. When it does, it travels in handcuffs, through sally ports, past glass and steel, and people trained to act as one organism. Recreation? Think of an outdoor room. A concrete pen that feels like an empty pool. 10 steps in a straight line, a few more in a circle. Wind across skin, sun on concrete, sky in a slice. Then back inside. It's not about comfort, it's about making sure every variable is known. And yet, buried in all that predictability, there's a ladder. The step-down program is the one lever the system gives you. Comply, stay clean, earn a little more air, a little more movement, a little more contact. Keep it up, and one day, you might leave ADX for a less restrictive prison. Slip up, and the floor opens. At the very bottom, sit two special worlds, H-Unit, where special administrative measures throttle your voice down to a whisper most people will never hear, and Range 13, a 4-cell wing designed for the rarest, tightest control the government knows how to build. You don't want to find out what it takes to end up there. That's the design, not to break bodies, to break momentum. Every hour repeats until the calendar stops mattering. That's how you take the temperature down in a system where one loud rumor can start a wildfire. But if the building is this good at silencing storms, what happens when the storm is in someone's head? If ADX is a volume knob, H-Unit is the point where it clicks almost to zero. This is where special administrative measures, AMs, turn communication into a tight, pre-approved trickle. Every word is inventory. Every letter is vetted. Calls, if allowed at all, are monitored with the intensity of a forensic audit. The point isn't to punish, it's to prevent signals from leaving the building and landing in places the government can't control. Think about what it means to live in a room where your voice has to travel through paperwork before it can touch another human. You can't just pick up a phone to vent or send a letter to test the waters. The language has to be plain. The intent has to be clean. No codes, no slang that can double as orders. No say this to him that can become a chain of favors outside the fence. In H-Unit, even silence is supervised, because silence in the wrong hands can be strategy. And H-Unit isn't just about who you are, it's about what your words could do. If your voice can rally, coordinate, or reinforce a network that exists beyond the razor wire, the system assumes nothing. It locks down the possibility of a message becoming movement. That's why this wing feels like another country inside the same address. The posture, the pace, the permissions, everything changes. Routine becomes a legal instrument. Yet even here, the machine leaves a path. If you stay compliant, no infractions, no weirdness in your mail, no attempts to stretch the rules, there's a slow, heavily documented route to more air. It's not generous, it's conditional. You earn a little more bandwidth, maybe a few more minutes on a monitored call, a narrow expansion on a list of approved contacts. In a normal prison, those are scraps. In H-Unit, they're oxygen. H-Unit teaches a lesson, the rest of ADX only hints at. Communication is power, and someone who can command attention from inside a concrete room is still dangerous. So, the building trims the speech, compresses the audience, and keeps the circle small enough to hold without gloves. There's a reason lawyers, families, and even other agencies take H-Unit paperwork seriously. It's where criminal justice bleeds into national security, and where one sentence written wrong can glow like a flare. But if H-Unit is about voices, Range 13 is about presence. That's the place the system keeps in reserve for when even the whisper of risk is too big. Range 13 is a short phrase for a long idea. Absolute control. It isn't for most people in ADX. It's a 4-cell answer to the question, what do you do when maximum isn't enough? The unit is simple, sterile, and unyielding. Doors that move with the authority of a bank vault, sightlines that leave nothing to chance. A rhythm so tight it feels mechanical. If ADX is a chessboard that limits your moves, Range 13 is the moment the board gets smaller and the clock speeds up. What lands someone here isn't just a fight or a threat shouted down a hallway. It's a pattern that convinces the system you're the kind of man who can turn tiny cracks into open doors. Maybe you've turned handoffs into coded traffic. Maybe you've staged violence through rumor and timing. Maybe the system believes your charisma is a lever you shouldn't be allowed to touch. Range 13 is the countermeasure. In a world where a glance can become a signal, the building cancels the glance. Life on Range 13 is measurement. Minutes are counted. Movements are tracked. The word contact is redefined until it barely resembles the normal world. You eat, you wash, you exercise, each inside a framework built to stop improvisation. The architecture doesn't argue with you. It doesn't threaten. It just refuses to negotiate. Concrete doesn't need to raise its voice. Here's the part that unnerves even veteran officers. The unit works because it's boring. Predictability is the most underrated form of power inside a prison. When a man can't exploit randomness, the tools he normally uses, charm, chaos, intimidation, start to dull. The machine isn't trying to humiliate you or make a spectacle. It's trying to turn off the weather so no one can sail. And still, the latter exists. Technically, keep your conduct clean for long enough, and the system may decide you can return to a less restrictive tier. In practice, that can feel like trying to grow a plant without sunlight. The incentives are real, but distant. The distance is the point. It stretches out in front of you like a desert highway, and somewhere far ahead there's a sign that says "Step down." Most men walk toward it because there's nothing else to do. A few sit down on the shoulder and let the days pass like trucks. If ADX has a soul, this is where you feel its coldest part. A belief that the safest prison is the one where very little happens, and the safest day is the one that looks exactly like yesterday. That design can keep staff alive and keep the federal system from catching fire. But there's a cost. When you squeeze the space for surprise down to almost nothing, you also squeeze the space for recovery, growth, and the kind of human messiness that sometimes helps a mind heal. Next comes the question that ADX can't answer with hardware. If you make a prison perfectly predictable, what happens to the people who have to live inside it year after year? No matter how flawless a building looks on paper, people don't live on paper, they live in their heads. And when the walls close in, the cracks don't always show in the concrete, they show in the inmates. By 2012, the whispers about what endless isolation was doing to men inside ADX had turned into a lawsuit that shook the Bureau of Prisons. It was called Cunningham vs. BOP, and it didn't just list names, it listed damage. Prisoners claimed they were spiraling into madness while the system looked away. Stories surfaced of men hurting themselves just to feel something, of untreated paranoia spreading behind locked doors, of voices in the head replacing voices on the phone. By the time the case landed in court, at least half a dozen men had already taken the irreversible way out, and others were leaving scars that proved the struggle wasn't abstract. For the first time, ADX was forced to face an accusation that cut deeper than any shank, not that it failed to control violence, but that it was quietly creating it inside people's minds. Lawyers argued that you can't keep a human being in a soundproof box for years without expecting the mind to twist. Studies backed them up, showing how long-term isolation feeds hallucinations, depression, and impulses that feel impossible to resist. The Bureau didn't just fight back, it adjusted. Mental health staff were doubled. Telepsychiatry booths appeared where conversations could happen under secure watch. Screening protocols were rewritten so that new arrivals got checked for illnesses before the concrete swallowed them. Even the ban on psych meds in the most restrictive units was lifted, a small admission that brains don't follow blueprints the way walls do. But here's the haunting detail. Most of the original plaintiffs never stayed to see the changes. They were transferred out to hospitals or specialized facilities where care was less of a formality. Men who'd spent years learning the silence of ADX suddenly had to learn something harder: how to speak again. The lawsuit forced the government to put on record what critics had been saying for years. You can build a cage so secure that not even sound escapes, but what you trap inside may not be the danger you planned for. Sometimes it's the collapse of the very people you locked away. And this debate didn't stay inside Colorado. It spread across oceans, because other governments started asking, if ADX can break a man down this far, should we really send our own citizens there? When Britain weighed whether to hand over Julian Assange to the US, lawyers didn't just point to the charges. They pointed to Florence, Colorado. The argument was simple. If he ended up in ADX under special measures, the isolation itself could amount to something crueler than the sentence. That debate wasn't about sympathy for a single man. It was about what ADX had come to symbolize, a place so controlled that even allies wondered if it crossed the line from prison into something else. This wasn't the first time. European courts have looked at American extradition requests and paused, asking if the destination might be the silent labyrinth in Colorado. Because once you're in the system's tightest wing, there are no press interviews, no unsupervised lawyer chats, no letters that slip through without inspection. Communication isn't just rare, it's nearly erased. The Bureau of Prisons defends the model as necessary. The men inside, after all, are not petty thieves. They are people whose networks can stretch across continents, whose words can spark violence thousands of miles away. To let that signal leak would be a risk the government doesn't want to roll the dice on. But the global conversation tells a different story, that ADX has become a symbol of America's hardest edge, a place even allies hesitate to trust with their citizens. To some, it's proof of strength, a fortress that guarantees order where chaos once lived. To others, it's proof of overreach, a system that can cage the body but risks poisoning the mind. Either way, the name Florence carries weight far beyond Colorado. In courtrooms in London, in human rights reports in Geneva, in whispered debates among diplomats, it surfaces as shorthand for absolute isolation. The debate isn't just about prison security anymore. It's about what kind of punishment a nation is willing to put its name on. And while governments argue, the men already inside don't wait for rulings. They live it, day after day in a building designed to make years blur into each other, until even time feels like another form of restraint. But who are these men exactly? The names behind the walls tell their own story, and each one explains why ADX was built the way it was. For all the talk of architecture and policies, ADX Florence is defined by the people it holds. Walk the tiers on paper and you'll see names that once filled headlines. Take Zacarias Moussaoui, the only person ever convicted in a US court for his role in the September 11th plot. A jury spared him the needle, but not freedom. He will spend the rest of his life inside Florence, locked away under conditions that guarantee his voice can't stir beyond concrete walls. Then there's Jakart Sarnav, the surviving Boston Marathon bomber. His brother died in a shootout, but Sarnav lived long enough to be captured, tried and sentenced to death. For now, he sits on federal death row within the Florence complex, every day a reminder of what terror in a public square can cost. Move down the roster and you find Ramzi Yousef, the man who lit the fuse in the 1993 World Trade Center bombing and later schemed to bring down multiple planes mid-air. His fingerprints are all over the early playbook of modern terror, and the government made sure his cell leaves no room for further imagination. It isn't just extremists. James Marcello, a Chicago outfit boss tied to murders in the infamous family secrets case, spends his days in the same fortress as men he once ruled with a nod and a phone call. Out on the streets, his word could clear or cloud entire neighborhoods. In Florence, words don't travel farther than a concrete wall. And then there's Nushir Gawadia, the engineer who leaked stealth technology secrets to foreign powers. He wasn't caught with a weapon, he was caught with equations. But in the eyes of the government, those equations were weapons too dangerous to be left unchecked. Now he shares the silence of men who killed with bombs and bullets. Each inmate is a different story, but together they explain ADX's logic. The prison is less about who you are and more about what you could still do if your voice, your reach, or your influence got out. It's about cutting the signal, no matter the source. But beyond the headlines and the names is the deeper question: what does it mean to build a place so secure that even memory starts to erode? ADX Florence lives in public imagination as the Alcatraz of the Rockies. A place whispered about in documentaries, dramatized in books, and pointed to as America's ultimate cage. But like most myths, the truth is more complicated. Inmates don't stream Hollywood movies or scroll through endless channels. The reality is filtered programming, educational shows, limited entertainment, and heavily controlled communication. There are radios, but they're tuned by policy. There are televisions, but they're windows to a world they can't touch. The myth says ADX is brutality for its own sake. The reality is more unsettling. It's order engineered so tightly that chaos has no oxygen. And in that order, men either bend to the rhythm or break against it. The system insists it works. No major riots, no large-scale escapes, and far fewer officer deaths than the 1980s era that inspired its creation. On paper, it's success. But critics ask a harder question. If safety is purchased by stripping life down to repetition, what's the cost in human terms? Even with new mental health reforms, ADX remains a test of what happens when control is pushed to its furthest edge. It proves that silence can be stronger than shackles, that geometry can be more powerful than guards, and that the most dangerous weapon in a prison isn't a blade or a bomb, it's influence. And maybe that's why ADX Florence draws so much fascination. It's not just a prison, it's a mirror of how far a country is willing to go to keep danger contained. The fortress in the desert isn't just about keeping people in, it's about showing the world what happens when control becomes the highest law. So when you hear the name ADX Florence, don't just think about concrete and razor wire. Think about the questions it leaves hanging in the air. How much safety is enough? How much silence is too much? And what happens when a place built to erase chaos starts erasing the people inside it too? And that's the story of ADX Florence, the prison that redefined control in America. Behind its walls are names that once shook the world, now reduced to silence by design. But the bigger story isn't who's locked inside, it's the debate their captivity forces on the outside. Is this the ultimate answer to danger, or the ultimate warning about what happens when safety is valued above everything else? If you found this dive into the world's toughest prison eye-opening, make sure to like the video and subscribe for more untold stories from the edges of history, crime, and power. Because sometimes the most shocking truths aren't found in the chaos, they're found in the silence.